All right, the Gibson Ripper was first introduced in 1973. Started seeing prototypes and ads. 74 is when you really started to see them hit the market. They built those basses all the way up to, I think, 83. It is an interesting bass. It was a big departure from a lot of previous Gibson ideas. Gibson's entire concept of building basses up to the point of the Ripper was to simply take one of their existing guitar models and put 4 strings and a little bit longer scale on it and call it a bass. And that really hurt them in the market. They really never could hold up to Fender. They had their devotees, but Fender ate the market up. I mean, in the early 70s, Bill Lawrence, the pickup maker, was hired by Gibson, and he was actually put in charge of designing a line of instruments for Gibson. And those included the Grabber bass, the G3 bass, the Gibson Ripper, the Marauder guitar, the L6S solid body guitar. There was a whole school of instruments designed around that, and they were mostly, I think, all maple, and they used a lot of odd phasing and series parallel switching and tone chokes, things that were very odd for the time being. And it was really a bold attempt by Gibson to try and do something new. And in that vein, we have the Ripper, which, as you can see, it's a body style that doesn't exist on any Gibson guitars. It didn't exist before this bass was introduced. It maybe kind of looks like a P bass, but it's not a direct rip-off of a P bass. It does have the long scale of a Fender. It has a glued-in neck, though, instead of the bolt-on neck like a Fender. The pickups that are in it are humbuckers, but unlike previous Gibson pickups, they're wired out of phase permanently. So when you solo one of those pickups, it has kind of a single coil quack type sound to it. It doesn't have that huge Gibson mudbucker sound that everybody's used to getting. They came with a 4-position rotary switch, which has confused a lot of people over the years. Originally, these basses came with an instruction manual, but as they were bought and sold and passed around and they were so odd, eventually people kind of forgot how they worked. I know I first bought my first one in 1989, and I never really understood how the controls were working on it. I just knew if you switch the switch and twist the knobs, you got a lot of different sounds out of it. So here's how it works. The 4-position switch gives you 4 very different pickup combinations. Position number 1 activates both pickups in series in phase. Position number 2 activates the bridge pickup only by itself. Position number 3 activates both pickups in phase parallel configuration. And position number 4 activates both pickups in series out of phase, which is was described back then as a very funky, dirty sound. Now the knobs on it gave you a volume like anything else, but then you had 2 other knobs. One was a treble bleed tone control, as you'd find on just about any other guitar, anything else Gibson made. But the 3rd knob is a Q filter, and that's where the choke coils inside this bass come into play. It bleeds the mid-range response through a set of choke coils. It ends up being a passive mid-range cut. Just by turning the knob back to 0, you cut a lot of the mids out. This is all passive, there's no batteries in this bass. And it's quite an ingenious setup. If you use those 4 positions of the rotary switch and the 3 knobs, you can get just an obscene amount of tones out of this thing. When they first came out, there was a pretty wide push by Gibson to get them in the hands of prominent players. They were played by Rick Danko, played them, Suzi Quatro, Gene Simmons of Kiss. Devo used them quite a bit. Later in the 90s, they enjoyed a bit of a resurgence with quite a few grunge and alt type bands picking them up because they could be bought cheap and they were just different, interesting. They were available, as I've seen, in mainly 2 finishes, mainly black and then maple blonde. But they also came in a burst, and there were a few different variations on that burst, and I've seen at least one red cherry one. Then of course they came with either a black or a tortoiseshell pickguard. This one here has a tortoiseshell pickguard, a reproduction that was made by Tony over at Pick Guardian. And if you have one of those original basses with the tortoise pick guard and it's coming apart, I really recommend you get a hold of them. These things look amazing. They don't look exactly like the original Gibsons. Frankly, I think they look better. And they won't eat your guitar apart either. That's a plus. They're incredibly comfortable to play. Just because of the body style. They can be a bit neck heavy, so you need to pick the right strap for them. My bass here, the maple one, is about 10.5 pounds, so it's kind of heavy. But this one over here, the 75, is alder. They made a whole run of alder Gibson Rippers in 1975, and I think that's the only year they made those. And that bass weighs a good 2 pounds less than this one. It's 8 and some change, and it's a whole lot lighter. It's a whole lot more comfortable to play. So if you're really thinking about hunting one down for you, keep that in mind. You might want a 75. You might want to hunt down an alder one. They originally came with a really strange 3-point bridge that you've seen on probably some Gibson basses. They could be strung from the top, or they could be strung through all the way through to the back. My own personal bass, I wasn't crazy about that bridge, so I put a hip shot aftermarket bridge on mine. That's a fantastic bridge. I love the feel of it. I love the sound of it. It's incredibly adjustable. You can adjust the string, the spacing in between the strings. You can get individual intonation adjustment. You can get individual height adjustment, and you can't get all of that out of the original Gibson bridge. So if you're in the market for an aftermarket bridge for it, think about the hip shot. It doesn't require any extra drilling or anything. It bolts straight onto your bass. It looks great, sounds great, top-notch piece of equipment. My bass also has some Gibson Thunderbird, relatively recent black tuning machines. They originally had the old Gibson, I think Shaler made those original tuners. They're the old flat metal ones, and these are the bigger, thicker ones. The blonde basses seem to always have come with a blonde fingerboard, maple fretboard. Mine has an ebony one because my bass was originally black. When I got hold of it, it had been spray painted red and gray and had a huge crack in it. So I had to refinish the whole thing, and I just ended up doing it blonde just because I thought it would look neat. It's my bass, and I don't care if it's all original or not. You see a lot of these selling on eBay that have been gutted and modified and chopped up. For some reason, people love to butcher these things, and I don't know why that is. If you've got one, please don't tear it apart. It's not easy to find the original choke control system for these, so they end up being lost. And frankly, if you don't have the mid-range cut and the switching system for it, it's just not a Ripper to me. I'm not interested in having EMGs or P-bass pickups in my Ripper. If I want that, I'll get a P-bass. Right now they're going usually right under $1,000. I see a lot of them on eBay with buy it now for like $1,300. I think that's some wishful thinking. Gibson reintroduced these a couple of years ago in a very limited run as the Ripper 2 with a 6-position switch that had some pretty different setup on it. Had a rosewood fingerboard, and it was listing for something like $2,500, which is nuts if you ask me, because you can buy a good one used for half that. There is another modification that I did to the 75 Ripper, and that was to put a 6-position switch in it and use the wiring configuration out of a L6S guitar. What that does is it gives you all the same choices as the Ripper original wiring, but it adds 2 more configurations to it. The neck pickup only, which the original Ripper would not let you do. And it also allows you to activate both pickups in parallel out of phase. So it's just another way of getting just a couple more sounds out of a bass that already gives you an unbelievable amount of sound. you.